Homeowners associations often exist with the noble intention of maintaining property values and fostering community spirit. However, in our neighborhood, what was originally designed to enhance our quality of life became an impenetrable fortress of rules that stifled individuality. Each resident was shackled by an extensive list of regulations governing everything from lawn aesthetics to paint colors. A pristine lawn was not just a suggestion, it was a mandate backed by hefty fines for noncompliance. The impact of these rules rippled through our community, creating animosity rather than harmony. Neighbors turned into adversaries, reporting each other's perceived infractions with a zeal that seemed disproportionate to the offenses. A blemish on a garden or an unapproved mailbox could ignite conflict. What started as a shared goal of beautification morphed into a culture of fear and resentment, where personal expression was diminished under the oppressive weight of conformity. At gatherings, conversations often centered around grievances with the HOA rather than fostering connections. Many residents felt trapped in their own homes, unable to embrace their creativity or personal style without risking penalties from the board. The atmosphere felt stifling and sterile, akin to living in a managed resort rather than a vibrant community. With these frustrations simmering beneath the surface, I realized that something had to change. This is where my journey began, determined to challenge the status quo and liberate my neighbors from this rule-bound prison. Little did I know that the path ahead would be anything but straightforward. As I navigated the suffocating landscape of our HOA, a growing sense of urgency propelled me into action. I realized that my dissatisfaction was not an isolated feeling. Many neighbors voiced their frustrations in hushed conversations, longing for change but hesitant to act. It became clear to me that the only path forward was to confront the status quo head-on. With my heart racing, I made the pivotal decision to run for HOA president. The idea of leadership was both exhilarating and intimidating. I envisioned a community where creativity and individuality flourished, free from the chains of unrealistic expectations. To rally support, I began engaging in candid discussions with fellow residents at local gatherings and neighborhood events. I shared my vision for a more open and accepting community, one that welcomed personal expression rather than penalizing it. However, I also faced the daunting reality of entrenched interests. Many residents were fearful of change, having internalized the HOA's rigid doctrine after years of adherence. My campaign wasn't just about winning an election. It was about igniting a movement that challenged deeply ingrained beliefs. As I prepared my platform and gathered supporters, I felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. Would they join me in this quest for freedom? Could I truly dismantle rules that had governed our lives for so long? The stakes had never been higher, and the journey ahead promised to be fraught with unpredictability, but I was ready to lead the charge. The campaign trail was both exhilarating and daunting, filled with unexpected moments that tested my resolve. As I set out to connect with residents, I found myself attending community events, door-to-door visits, and even casual gatherings at the local coffee shop. Each conversation revealed a tapestry of opinions. Some were eager for change, while others clung tightly to the comfort of the familiar HOA rules. One evening, during a neighborhood barbecue, I struck up a candid discussion with a few longtime residents. They shared personal stories of frustration. One woman described how her garden was critiqued for being too wild, and another recounted the stress caused by receiving fines for minor infractions. Listening to their experiences fueled my passion and reassured me that I wasn't alone in this fight. However, I also encountered staunch supporters of the existing regime who were determined to maintain the status quo. During my speeches at HOA meetings, their resistance was palpable. They questioned my intentions and framed me as a disruptor rather than a reformer. At times, it felt like an uphill battle against years of conditioned compliance. Yet, amidst these challenges, emerged unexpected allies. Neighbors who had previously remained silent began voicing their support for my vision. Their encouragement bolstered my confidence and motivated me to push harder against entrenched beliefs. As the weeks passed and the election approached, I realized that this campaign had transformed from a personal endeavor into a collective movement for change, igniting hope in those ready to reclaim their community spirit. The day of the election arrived, and I felt a whirlwind of nerves and excitement coursing through me. As votes were counted, I could hardly believe the scale of support I had received. Each tally felt like a small victory for our movement. When the final results were announced, the room erupted in cheers. Somehow, against all odds, I had won. Overwhelmed by emotion, I stood at the front of the room, absorbing the reality of my unexpected victory. It was a surreal moment, filled with both joy and disbelief. While many residents celebrated, old board members wore expressions of shock and disapproval. Their faces told a story of resentment, a clear signal that they viewed my win as a threat to their tightly held power. The reactions from my neighbors were mixed. Some embraced me enthusiastically, offering congratulations and words of encouragement, while others remained skeptical. A few longtime supporters of the HOA approached me with caution, expressing concern about how this change might affect our community's structure. Their apprehension was palpable. They feared chaos in place of order. Despite this unease, I felt an undeniable surge of responsibility. Winning the presidency was only the beginning. It was now up to me to navigate these treacherous waters and prove that transformation could lead to a healthier community. As I looked around at those who believed in change, I understood that my journey was just starting, and it would be anything but predictable. As I stepped into my new role as HOA president, the weight of expectations settled heavily on my shoulders. My first priority was to initiate changes that would breathe new life into our community, starting with an overhaul of the most unpopular rules. I proposed a revised agenda for our first meeting, eager to create an atmosphere of collaborative discussion rather than top-down governance. The room was electric as residents gathered, some hopeful while others eyed me warily. I kicked things off by suggesting more flexible guidelines for landscaping and exterior home designs. Ideas met with mixed reactions. A few members voiced their support, recalling tales of neighbors penalized for wanting to paint their homes in vibrant colors or plant unconventional gardens. Yet, old guard members quickly attempted to steer the discussion back toward maintaining conformity. Navigating these contrasting sentiments was a delicate balancing act. I found myself torn between my desire for radical change and the need to address the fears of those who believed that any shift could unravel the very fabric of our community. Each meeting became a battleground as I worked to incorporate feedback while pushing my agenda. I knew I had to be patient and build trust among those hesitant to embrace change. Slowly but surely, I began fostering an environment where residents felt safe to speak their minds, including those who typically honored every rule without question. With each small victory, like approving a neighbor's proposal for a unique mailbox, I felt our collective spirit begin to shift, inching us closer to a revitalized sense of community. As I embarked on my presidency, it quickly became apparent that the old guard was not ready to relinquish their influence without a fight. The former board members, who had long overseen the stringent rules, began to escalate their opposition in increasingly blatant ways. During meetings, they would interrupt my proposals with pointed questions designed to undermine my authority, framing my ideas as radical or impractical. Their tactics ranged from subtle sarcasm to outright hostility, and it became a regular occurrence for tensions to flare. One evening, after I suggested a community event to celebrate individual expression through art and gardening, one board member scoffed loudly, insisting that such activities would lead to chaos and unsightly properties. I could feel eyes in the room shift uncomfortably between us, but I held my ground. The confrontations intensified as each meeting passed, with some residents appearing torn between their loyalty to the former board and their desire for change. Despite the pressure, I stood firm in my vision for a more inclusive HOA. However, this was not simply about implementing changes. It turned into a struggle for legitimacy. I dedicated time outside of meetings to connect with residents individually, explaining the goals of my presidency and enlisting their support against those who resisted progress. But as the conflicts grew fiercer, I realized that this battle would require more than just dialogue. It would demand strategic maneuvering to protect my position and ensure that our community could flourish in a new direction. As I pressed on with my vision for the community, it became increasingly evident that not everyone was on board with the changes I proposed. The mixed reactions from fellow homeowners created a palpable divide. Some were enthusiastic supporters, eager to embrace a new way of thinking, while others expressed outright hostility toward any deviation from the established norms. It felt like walking a tightrope, trying to manage these opposing perspectives without alienating either side. During meetings, passionate debates erupted over my suggestions, from relaxing architectural guidelines to organizing more social events. Supporters would cheer and nod in agreement, but critics often countered with formidable objections. One particularly vocal resident argued passionately that allowing for more personal expression would lead to chaos: homes painted in garish colors, mismatched mailboxes, and an overall decline in property values. These claims left many in attendance hesitant and uneasy. I made it a priority to listen to grievances, understanding that many of these concerns stemmed from years of conditioning under a strict regime. Acknowledging their fears became central to my approach. I often invited open discussions after meetings where residents could voice their worries one-on-one. Gradually, I learned that bridging the gap required patience and transparency. By sharing data about successful HOA reforms in other communities and emphasizing the benefits of collaboration, I began to win over some skeptics. Although it was clear I had a long way to go, each small victory reminded me that change is a process, a journey fueled by ongoing dialogue and understanding. With the groundwork laid for my vision, it was time to push for specific rule revisions that had long frustrated residents. One of the most pressing issues was our outdated landscaping regulations, which mandated uniformity and stifled creativity. Homeowners often felt constrained by an overly simplistic aesthetic that required perfectly manicured lawns and identical shrubbery. I proposed a more flexible approach that would allow for diverse plant choices and personalized garden designs, arguing that this would not only enhance property values but also foster a sense of individuality within the community. Next on my list was the pet policy, which had been unjustly severe. Residents were limited to specific breeds and faced hefty fines for minor infractions. Many families felt their rights as pet owners were being trampled upon, leading to resentment and division. I recommended a revised policy allowing for a broader range of pets, along with responsible ownership guidelines, such as leash laws and waste cleanup requirements, as a way to ensure harmony while respecting residents' desires for companionship. Additionally, I aimed to tackle the draconian rules surrounding seasonal decorations, which discouraged homeowners from expressing joy through festive displays. My argument was simple: embracing varied holiday decorations could enliven the community spirit and deepen neighborly connections. As I rolled out these proposals during meetings, I made sure to back them up with data showing how similar changes benefited other communities. The goal was clear: inspire enthusiasm while alleviating fears about potential chaos, creating space for a thriving neighborhood that celebrated both individuality and unity. As I rolled out my proposed revisions, the air in the community grew increasingly charged. What I had hoped would be a hopeful shift towards individuality turned into episodes of heightened discord among neighbors. Disputes erupted over seemingly innocuous changes, revealing deep-seated divisions that my initiatives had unearthed. One evening, a raucous confrontation erupted during a meeting when a resident vehemently opposed the new landscaping guidelines I suggested. "Don't let your garden ruin the neighborhood," she shouted, sparking a heated back and forth that drew lines between supporters and critics. Her words echoed throughout the room, leading to an emotional plea from another homeowner who argued passionately about his dreams of planting wildflowers instead of grass. Similarly, my attempts to revise pet policies ignited rivalries where none had existed before. A family wanting to adopt a rescue dog faced backlash from adjacent neighbors who perceived this change as an invasion of their quiet lifestyle. Tensions escalated as disputes over noise and property boundaries began surfacing, fueled by fears that relaxing rules on pets would lead to chaos in our once peaceful enclave. To manage these conflicts and keep lines of communication open, I organized smaller neighborhood forums aimed at creating dialogue between opposing sides. These gatherings, however, often devolved into arguments rather than constructive discussions. It became clear that facilitating peace in our community was not just about proposing changes. It required addressing underlying fears and fostering understanding amidst rising tensions, an ongoing challenge that tested my leadership at every turn. The situation reached a breaking point during a particularly contentious HOA meeting that had been called to address the escalating tensions in our community. As I stood at the front, presenting updates on rule revisions, it became clear that emotions were running high when conversations quickly devolved into shouting matches. Suddenly, a conflict erupted between two residents who had previously coexisted peacefully. One neighbor, passionate about adopting a rescue dog, accused another of spreading rumors that her children would run wild and disrupt their quiet street. "You don't care about community values," she shouted, while the other retaliated with a pointed critique of her garden, claiming it was an eyesore. The exchange spiraled out of control as both parties unleashed months of pent-up frustrations, and soon, the entire room was filled with voices shouting over one another. I attempted to intervene, urging everyone to calm down and refocus on solutions rather than personal grievances. But the tension was electric. This was no longer just about changes in policy. It became deeply personal. A moment of complete chaos ensued when someone suggested postponing all decisions until the new president learns how things work, sparking a wave of agreement among certain factions in the crowd. It was at that moment I realized how fragile community dynamics could be, and that the path to change would demand not just dialogue, but reconciliation among those who felt their voices had been lost in the process. That chaotic evening left me with uncomfortable clarity. My role as president was not merely to propose new rules, but to mend relationships torn apart by years of hostility and fear. In the aftermath of escalating conflicts and heightened tensions, I found myself reflecting deeply on my leadership style and its impact on the community. Initially, my ambition to challenge the status quo and advocate for individual expression felt noble, but as the chaos unfolded, I began to question whether my approach had been misguided or mismanaged. The confrontations during the meetings had exposed wounds that ran deeper than I had anticipated. My intentions to foster creative change had inadvertently stirred anxiety and resistance among residents who felt their comfort zones were under siege. Did my eagerness to implement changes overshadow the need for patience in navigating their fears? Recognizing this prompted a reevaluation of how I engaged with neighbors. Instead of solely pushing my agenda forward, I realized I needed to adopt a more empathetic and listening-oriented style of leadership. The priority shifted from making changes to ensuring that community members felt heard and respected throughout the process. I made a concerted effort to connect with those who were resistant to change by inviting them for coffee or small discussions outside formal meetings. Showing genuine interest in their concerns helped rebuild trust, allowing for conversations that were less combative and more collaborative. With this renewed perspective, I started framing discussions not just around rules, but about broader visions for our community's future, helping all members to feel part of a shared journey toward a vibrant neighborhood where individuality could truly thrive alongside harmony. To restore harmony in our divided community, I organized a series of community forums aimed at fostering open dialogue among residents. The goal was clear: provide a safe space for neighbors to express their grievances while also encouraging conversations about their hopes for the future. Each forum began with ground rules, emphasizing respect and the importance of listening, setting the tone for constructive discussions. The first meeting drew a surprisingly large crowd, filled with a mix of apprehension and hope. Residents arrived with passionate opinions, ready to voice their frustrations about recent changes, but I was determined to guide the conversation toward understanding rather than defensiveness. As emotions ran high, I facilitated discussions by inviting individuals to share their personal stories about how HOA rules had impacted their lives, creating a platform for empathy. One particularly poignant moment occurred when a longtime resident shared how strict pet policies had affected her ability to adopt a rescue dog, which she had dreamed of for years. This revelation prompted others to share similar experiences, creating an unexpected bond among attendees that broke down some of the barriers that had been built over time. While not every conversation led to immediate agreement, these forums allowed residents to see each other as individuals rather than adversaries. Slowly, I noticed the environment beginning to shift. Neighbors who once stood on opposite sides of contentious issues started engaging in more thoughtful dialogues, planting seeds for ongoing healing. It became evident that these efforts were crucial steps toward mending relationships and restoring a sense of community spirit that had long been absent. As the community forums began to promote healing, the dynamics within the HOA board also started shifting. While some members began to embrace my efforts to foster inclusivity and change, others remained entrenched in their opposition, viewing any reform as a direct threat to their authority. This division became evident during board meetings, where debates over new proposals often turned heated. One notable incident occurred when I introduced a plan to simplify the approval process for community events. A longtime board member, who had previously clung tightly to control over such matters, vocally opposed the idea, arguing it would lead to disorder. In response, one of the newer board members, the very person I had inspired during my campaign, backed me up, asserting that we needed to adapt to the community's evolving needs. This moment underscored the growing split within the board itself, as alliances formed and shifted based on support for or resistance to my initiatives. Despite this fracturing, I made it a point to engage all board members in discussions about our collective goals, emphasizing that our primary focus should be on enhancing community spirit rather than personal agendas. However, retaliatory votes against my proposals started surfacing, aimed at undermining my authority and stalling progress. Navigating this complex landscape was challenging. I quickly learned that leadership was not just about guiding change, but also about managing relationships within the board. I recognized that fostering a unified front among board members was critical to ensuring that our community could move forward together, even amidst differing perspectives. It became clear that reconciliation within our leadership was essential for promoting lasting harmony throughout the neighborhood. Reflecting on my tumultuous tenure as HOA president, I realized that the chaos we faced offered invaluable lessons about governance, leadership, and community engagement. One key takeaway was the importance of empathy in leadership. Initially, I approached change with a sense of urgency, believing that swift action would inspire others and restore enthusiasm in the community. However, I learned that true engagement requires patience and understanding, especially when addressing long-held fears among residents. Another significant lesson was the necessity of fostering relationships rather than merely focusing on rulemaking. Building trust with residents turned out to be more vital than pushing for immediate reforms. By encouraging open dialogue and actively listening to community concerns, I discovered that people were more willing to embrace change when they felt valued and included in the decision-making process. The experience also underscored the power of collaboration. Engaging residents in discussions about their needs and desires led to more meaningful solutions than imposing top-down changes. I found that when people felt heard, they became more invested in the outcome, which helped bridge divides within the community. Lastly, I recognize that navigating conflict is an inherent part of leadership. Rather than avoiding difficult conversations, addressing them head-on facilitated growth and understanding among neighbors. These lessons taught me that effective governance extends beyond mere rule-breaking. It involves fostering a culture of respect, inclusivity, and shared responsibility, ultimately paving the way for a vibrant community where everyone can thrive together. As I conclude my tenure as HOA president, I find myself reflecting on the whirlwind of experiences that shaped not only my leadership style, but also the community itself. While the journey was fraught with challenges, it ultimately reaffirmed my belief in the power of collaboration and understanding. I am proud of the progress we made in fostering an environment where individual voices are valued and respected. Looking ahead, I am committed to remaining involved in our community, but rather than seeking re-election, I see my role evolving into one of support and mentorship for future leaders. My aspiration is to empower new board members with the tools and insights necessary to navigate the complexities of governance while maintaining a focus on inclusivity. I envision a balanced community atmosphere where open communication continues to thrive, a space where residents feel comfortable expressing their ideas and concerns without fear of retribution. This will be critical for sustaining the momentum we have achieved. Moreover, I hope to establish ongoing community events that encourage participation in local decision-making processes. Such initiatives could further solidify our bonds and cultivate a sense of belonging among all residents. While my term as president may have come to an end, my commitment to our neighborhood remains strong. Together, we have laid the groundwork for a vibrant future, and it is now up to us all to continue nurturing this renewed spirit within our community.